Welcome to the Friday edition of Lance World. And on Tuesday I promised you a recipe, and I'm going to give you one. But when I was putting the Tuesday video together, I realized that I had other things to say about debt, and so I called it part one of two parts. And so I'm going to also add the second part here. And so let's get started. All right, let's do the recipe first. Very quick, very simple. I hadn't really put an awful lot of thought into a new recipe, but I had a pork belly. And pork bellies are not very common in suburban supermarkets in the United States because the pork bellies are pretty much all turned into bacon. And you have to go to specialty places, usually like in an Asian neighborhood or South American area, and you can get pork bellies, but they're very rare in the United States. Here in Asia, you practically fall over them because people use pork bellies all the time. So I had decided that I was going to roast a pork belly. Very simple. Here's the pork belly, which I've doused very heavily in salt, and I've also scored it up because it's going to go into a very hot oven, and the skin that I've scored is going to turn into crackling, very crisp, and then the fat is going to dry out, and the meat will be really tender. So into the oven, hottest as I can get it. I think it's about 260 on my oven Celsius, around 500 Fahrenheit, for about 25 minutes. And meanwhile, I'm going to make a mustard sauce, and I'm just going to show you the rudiments again here. You can figure it out for yourself. I made a saute of mushrooms and leeks. I always use leeks as opposed to onions if I can. So saute them, then dump in some flour and some, I use duck fat as it happens, because I found this duck fat in an Australian supermarket. So make a roux and then add some beef stock and some English mustard. Very important. English mustard is it's yellow mustard, but it's not like the yellow mustard you find in the United States. It's really hot and spicy. And so stir it all together, saute, and there's your sauce. And I also roasted some potatoes along with the with pork belly. Chop it up into suitable pieces and serve up, and there you go. Now, mustard sauce I use quite commonly with kidneys when I make them, sauteed kidneys. Sometimes for sausages, not very often. Pork, generally speaking, because English mustard is pretty much like the standard for pork, but you can also use it with beef. Like a roast beef sandwich with mustard is very nice, although I prefer horseradish. Anyway, there's my recipe: pork belly with mustard sauce. Now on to debt part two. And I realized I hadn't quite caught you up on the mechanics of teaching in university in the United States. That a 3-credit course, the basis of a 3-credit course is 3 hours seat time per week for 15 weeks. And of course you have to pass the exams and so forth. But that's the model. Now, at the university where I taught for 30 odd years, we struggled with the SUNY Central Administration for a very long time, because particularly the social science faculty didn't want to go back to teaching until after Labor Day, and they wanted to finish before Christmas. And they also were happy to take several holidays certainly in the fall semester, that included Thanksgiving, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes 2 days for Rosh Hashanah, a day for Yom Kippur, depending on when they fell in the calendar. And so you ended up with a very short semester. I mean, we'd probably really only do 13 weeks. And eventually the SUNY administration in Albany said, no, you can't do that. And so what we ended up having to do was to begin our teaching in the middle of August. So we'd do 2 weeks, and then there'd be a break for Labor Day, and we would take the Jewish holidays sometimes. Although it was kind of interesting, we took them more when we didn't have a Jewish president. Like when we had a Jewish president, they'd often say, "Oh no, we're going to teach on those days." The Yom Kippur, they caved, but not Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, they say, well, if you want to take it off, take it off as a student, but faculty are obligated to teach on those days. And then there's Thanksgiving, and that again depended. Like Thanksgiving week, we would teach Monday and Tuesday, but not Wednesday, because the students needed to travel to get home. At least if they were living in New York. If they were getting further afield, they probably wouldn't do it. But we would teach Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday would be off. And so, sometime towards the end of Christmas, we'd end up with these weird weeks where we'd say, okay, this week, Monday is going to be Wednesday, because we took a Wednesday off for Rosh Hashanah, what have you. I mean, it all got really weird. But the point was that by the end of the semester, we'd had 15 Mondays, 15 Tuesdays, and so on, and 3 hours somehow or other in each whole week. And it wasn't really 15 weeks when you think about it, because there are a lot of faculty who would meet their first class for like 10 minutes. They'd give out the syllabus, they'd talk about the requirements, midterm, final, term paper, size of the term paper, subject matter, any questions? Nope, go home. But if you taught a 3-hour class, you couldn't do that. You had to really buckle down and do the whole 3 hours. And in fact, when I taught classes that were only 1 hour 3 times a week, I met for the first class for the full hour. I wouldn't necessarily get into a lot of detail, but I'd give them what they deserved, an hour's instruction. And sometimes it would be kind of weird personal stuff, but it was my attempt to get them engaged in the class right from the start, rather than say basically, I don't want to be here, and so here's the syllabus, go home. I mean, that's a bad message. So, but anyway, that's the regular semester. For summer school, the normal summer school session would be 7.5 weeks, and not at the SUNY schools, but at my University of North Carolina school, they've got 2 sessions in, 2 7.5-week sessions in, teaching basically 6 hours a week as opposed to 3 hours a week. And those classes were normally taught by the graduate students, and I was a graduate student there, so I used to teach them. And then there's the intensives, which is something that was peculiar to Purchase College, at least in my experience. As soon as commencement was over, like commencement was typically on a Sunday in May, and that Monday we began our intensive summer classes. And they were 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks. So it's still 15, not 15 weeks, 15 days, 3 hours a day. And I used to teach too. I used to teach a class in the morning from 9 to 12, an hour's lunch, and then a class in the afternoon from 1 to 4. And it was brutal. I mean, you barely get a chance to turn around, and you have to come back. Because I was commuting 2 hours each way from my home in the Catskills. So I would get up at 6 and get out the door and teach until 4, and then I'd hit rush hour traffic on the Tappan Zee Bridge over the Hudson River, and so I'd get home maybe about 7 o'clock, sometimes even later than that, and then I had to turn right around and come back. But there were several advantages for me, the most important being money, because I was always in debt, as I mentioned last time. I was always trying to play catch up, never had any money left over at the end of the month. And if I wanted to do any research, or if I wanted to take the family on a vacation somewhere, I needed extra money, and that I could do this. If I did a summer session, 7-8 weeks, that's fine, but then I'd have no time to travel. But if I did the intensive, then I would get $3,000 per class, so that's $6,000 after tax. And I mean, sometimes I had to just plow it back into my to my debts, but often I could go off and do some research somewhere. And there was one point when I decided to just kick around with my students this idea, like, all right, if the most intensive course we have so far is 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks, what if we just started at some point and kept going for 45 hours without a break? Because that's, it's 45 hours seat time. So why not just do it all at once? Well, of course, I never did it. And one of the reasons is that you have to stop every so often, like every hour or hour and a half or 3 hours, whatever, and just ruminate and read. Like I would, if I had a textbook for my intro course, which was the course I taught in the morning, they'd have to read a chapter in their textbook, maybe 50 pages, something like that, for the next class. Well, if you don't have any space between classes, then you don't have any time to do any reading. The 45 hours is just all the lectures or discussion or whatever. I mean, it would be useless, of course. But even with the intensives, like if I say, okay, tomorrow I want you to read chapter 9 on kinship, that could be a pretty dense chapter and could be pretty hard to wade through. And I have no doubt that a great number of the students didn't even do the reading. So that when I came and I had expected them to do the reading, it wasn't always to my benefit. Now, what I ended up doing, and I ended up doing here in Phnom Penh as well, is that I would assign a reading to a class. I didn't do intensives here in Phnom Penh, but in New York, when I assigned a reading, the first thing I would do next class is to go around the class and ask a question of each of them, like something like, I don't know, first student, what is a cross cousin? Second student, what is a parallel cousin? Third student, what is a matrilineal relationship? Next one, what is patrilocal residence? I'd go around the class just to see that they had at least a minimal inkling about what the reading was about. But even if they did the reading, they still didn't have a chance to digest it before they got to the next class. And there were going to be times when they just didn't understand it. So the intensives were not great, in terms of pedagogy. So why did I do them? Why did the college do them? Why did students do them? It's very simple. In the modern world, university study, particularly for undergraduates, is just like a factory. At least I'm talking about the United States. It's very different in Europe. But it's just factory work. You put in your hours and you get your pay. It's very much like wage labor. And I've recently written about wage labor. I used to work in a factory near where I used to live in England when I was a teenager. I worked in the stockroom in a light engineering factory, mostly doing inventory. And inventory is truly dull work. This factory had a stockroom all lit by fluorescent lights, no windows, all painted grey, with shelves stocked with boxes that had stock numbers on them, a six-figure from 0000001 to 999999, and different stock parts in each of them, all like grommets and screws and what have you. And the task was to count what's in the box, note down on a card that's in the box how many you've inventoried, move to the next box. And it was just endless and tedious. But the thing is that I got paid well for it. I used to get paid 7 shillings and 6pence an hour, which in those days was a lot of money. I used to earn £15 a week, which was close to what a married man could live on. Couldn't buy a house, but could sustain a family on that kind of money, really good money. So that's why I did it. Although in hindsight, I can't quite understand what I needed the money for, because I didn't spend it. I just put it all in the bank. But it was this sense that I can turn my time into money, as in the proverb, time is money. Well, time isn't money. Time is time. And one thing happened to me when I was working at the factory that stayed with me all my life. I mean, we're talking about 60 years ago now. I was probably more bored than usual, and I was doing the inventory, and I looked up at the clock, and it was maybe 3 o'clock or something like that, and I just said out to the universe, "Oh, I wish it were 5 o'clock." And this older worker, I think his name was Alf, I don't remember, he was a very taciturn guy. He turned to me and he said, "Why are you wishing your life away?" And at the time I thought, stupid old git, what do you know? Because I was 18 years old or something like that. But he was right. I was saying that I wanted to take 2 hours between 3 and 5 and get rid of them. Like I don't want them to exist anymore. That's my life. Those hours on the clock are hours of my life, you know, and one day I'll die, you know, and I'd like to have those hours. So why was I wishing those hours away? And I've written a lot about that in recent times. And, you know, I don't wish my life away now. I'm very productive every hour I possibly can, even when I'm doing the dishes or taking out the garbage. I'm still trying to, you know, like fill my life with purpose. But when you turn university education into wage labor, it becomes meaningless. You're saying, okay, I'm going to take these 3 hours a week for 15 weeks and turn them into a product that I can sell. That's diminishing your humanity. That's making you into a, you know, sort of sophisticated but still a wage laborer, and that's not a good way to start your life. You know, when you're, you know, in your late teens, early 20s, you're already thinking about how you're going to make your education into hourly wage labor. I did it because I was in debt. You know, that's to say I was teaching in that fashion because I needed the money. I needed the money because the whole system was rigged against me to put me in debt all the time. And I just didn't, I had no way of breaking out of that system at that time. And I just wonder how many people there are, professionals in particular, but workers in general, who spend the bulk of their working lives working to get out of debt that they're in because they're working. It's such a paradox, but I'm free of it now. I'm glad to say. Well, anyway, go off and make pork belly and mustard sauce. Have a joyous weekend. Please like the videos, please subscribe, please tell your friends, and I'll be back on Tuesday with something, but I have no idea what it could possibly be at this point. Have a good weekend.